Dear America, across the wide and lonesome prairie, the Oregon Trail Diary of Hattie Campbell, 1847, by Christiana Gregory, published by Scholastic Books. 2 days later. Now that Aunt June's feeling better, she took her calendar around until she found someone who'd been making notches in the side of a wagon. We think it's May 8th, Saturday, 1847. In the distance there's a light green ribbon stretched through the middle of a wide valley. Pa says this is the Platte River, and it will guide us into the mountains. The days are warming up, so Pepper and I take our shoes off to walk. This is after we're out of our mother's sight. The tops of our feet are brown from the sun, the bottoms are tough as leather. She's more talkative now, and not at all shy about lifting her skirt to cool off when no one's looking. I'm fond of her, for she knows how to laugh, and she also has a soft heart. Like me, she's worried about the lost children and their poor mother, more so maybe because she and Wade themselves are twins. We still look behind us, hoping to see dust from their family's wagon trying to catch up. Wade joined us today with one of his new friends, a tall boy with curly brown hair and a gentle manner. His name is Gideon. He's 17 years old, but so shy he took one look at Pepper's beautiful green eyes and blushed. He stared down at his feet almost the whole 3 hours we walked together. Wade now, he's not shy. He told a joke when he figured I was the only one listening to him. It went like this. Many X's. Aunt June saw over my shoulder while I was sitting after supper and said I must not repeat such naughty jokes and that I'd best cross it out before Ma sees. But I still think it was funny. May 10th, Monday. As we headed down a bluff toward the Platte River, there was already many campfires, tents, and wagons. It felt the same as when our steamboat arrived in Independence. So many people. Most are from Wisconsin territory. They have northern accents, a speech that is not near as slow as folks from Kentucky. Some brothers from Iowa have brought with them 800 young fruit trees to plant in Oregon. The seedlings are just a few inches tall. Well, says Pa, seems these here are our new traveling companions. The trail is broad and sandy here on the south side of the Platte, and it feels like we're pulling uphill. Pa says we'll go over 100 miles before we have to cross, and it'll take maybe 10 days. I do dread having to cross another river. Mosquitoes are fierce. There are itchy bites on my arms, necks, and cheeks, even on my head where my hair is parted. It's near impossible not to scratch vigorously. Every morning we fry up skeeter cakes. I've tried and tried to stir quick, and even if the batter's clean when I pour, somehow bugs see it as a place to land. And land they do like specks of pepper. I can see no way around it. At night there are campfires way across the river on the north side. Our men are talking low among themselves, wondering if Indians are following us. If they are following us, what are we to do? Come sunup, all we can see is dust and horses and what looks like wagons. But Pa says if they ain't Indians, what are they, and why do they travel alone? Evening. Tall Joe and 3 of his friends crossed over by way of sandbars and shallows to see who these strangers are. They're Mormons from Illinois, Tall Joe reported back to us. Their leader's a big fellow named Brigham Young. There was only 3 women and 2 children, and the rest is men, about 140 we counted, and 3 Negro servants, looks like. Tall Joe says they're heading west, maybe to the valley of the Great Salt Lake to start a colony. Thousands more will come next year. Don't ask me why. It's just a desert full of dead things. Paul asked Tall Joe, well, why do they stay on the other side of the river? There ain't no trail. I don't know, the old trapper said between mouthfuls of beans. Maybe they's worried there won't be enough grass. I don't know. A wagon train is like a small town the way talk spreads. Soon everyone, it seems, had a story about the Mormons, mainly that Mormon men each have several wives, and the reason they left Illinois is because they want to find a place to live where folks won't keep telling they're committing adultery. Mrs. Lewis said, frankly, I prefer they stay on the other side of the river on account of I don't want any polygamists getting friendly with our daughters and sisters. Leave old Brigham Young be. Let them go their way. Myself, personally, I think something's wrong with a religion that says men get to have as many wives as they please all at once. Pepper says so, too. Before bed. Forgot to say that today Benny took off his shirt and threw it in the river. I don't know why he did this, except that he's 2 years old and doesn't know better. Now he has one shirt to last all the way to Oregon. I must watch carefully to make sure he don't also throw away his shoes. Next day. At noon, Mama was looking through our kitchen box, taking things out, then putting them back. Hattie, she said, have you seen Grandma's china plate, the little one with roses? I thought I put it in after breakfast. I helped Ma look. We tried to think together where we last set it. Suddenly I caught my breath, remembering. Pepper and I had carried our family's dishes to the stream, where we dipped them in cold water and rubbed them with sand. To dry, we laid them on the grassy bank and sat for a while talking. There were other women doing the same. One of them was Mrs. Kenker. I'm worried Mrs. Kenker stole something else from us, but if I tell Ma, there might be arguments, and Ma's already wore out and nervous as it is. I don't want to bother her with something new to worry about. How can someone who looks like my dear old grandma be a thief? After supper, when the fiddlers were getting warmed up, I walked over to the Kenkers' wagon just to see what I could see. Mr. and Mrs. were sitting on stools by their wheel, talking sweet to the Anderson family. The 5 little girls were on a blanket that was laid out in the dirt, except with the tea set they made from acorn caps. Cassie was singing a song to her baby sister, Eliza May. Hello, Hattie, dear, Mrs. Kenker said. We're having cocoa in a moment. Would you like to join us? No, ma'am, I would not. I kept walking. My, she said. I know it wasn't polite to answer her so sharp, but I don't care. Later, we are camped by the Platte. Smoke from the Mormons' campfire drifts towards us with a good smell of beef roasting. I would like to meet the 2 Mormon children and see what they're like, what kind of clothes they're wearing, and so forth. How lonesome it must be for them not to have friends to play with on such a long journey. Mosquitoes are still a terrible nuisance. Every bit of my skin itches. Ma says the only way to keep them off is to smear mud on our bites, but I tried this 3 nights in a row. By sunup my face was so tight I couldn't smile, and when it was all washed off my skin was dry as a stone, which itched almost as bad as the bites. Pepper and I followed a tiny stream out of camp to a marshy area. Growing nearby was a small crop of wild carrots and parsnips. We pulled their bushy tops until we had enough to fill our aprons. I dislike vegetables. They make me feel vomity, but Aunt June says to gather any food we see because we don't know what tomorrow will bring. Along the path we also found a tree with tiny green apples, but left them as they weren't ripe. Another day. Something horrible has happened, and I fear I'm to blame. Just before supper last night, little Cassia came to where Pepper and I was cutting up potatoes and onions for soup. While Cassia watched, I sliced all the parsnips and gave her a couple bites when she held out her palm. The kettle was hanging over a fire near the center of the camp, so Pepper and I brung the vegetables along with 3 salted ox tongues, preserved from those that died the other day. We dumped the meat and onions into the boiling water, but saved the rest to add later. We returned to help Mrs. Lewis, Pepper's mother, make pies. I rolled out dough on the wagon seat, enough for 6 pie crusts. This took near an hour. While I was pressing them into pans, we heard screams. Lying in the dirt by the kettle was 3 boys. They were shaking and twisting and foaming at the mouth and gasping for breath. When we saw that one of the boys was Wade, Pepper and her mother ran with their hands in the air, crying out his name. Such was my hurry that when I jumped down from the seat, my skirt swept the pie crust off down into the dirt. What is it? What's happened? Wade's mother cried, pulling him into her arms. Pa noticed the basket of vegetables had been knocked over. He scooped up a handful and yelled, No one eat anything! No one! He leapt onto a crate so folks could see him and kept hollering, Who made the soup? What's in it? I was so frightened my insides were shivering, but I stepped forward. Pepper did too. Pa, I said, trying not to cry, it was our turn to cook tonight. We made it. Hattie, show me what you put in quick. To the gathering men he shouted, Bury all this, bury it now. Meanwhile, some of the women were scooping charcoal from the fire and crushing into powder. They tried to force it down the boys' throats with water, but their jaws were clenched too tight. Pepper and I showed Pa where we cut the meat and vegetables. He picked up the potato peelings, smelled them, put a piece on his tongue, and waited a moment. He did the same with an onion skin. He tasted a sliver of beef. These here are all right, he said. What else, Hattie? I showed him the parsnip tops we broke off and set aside for salad. Pa's face fell. He looked up at Mr. Lewis, then back at me. He sniffed the greens and placed a tiny bit of the root on the tip of his tongue. In an instant he spit it out. God help us, he said. This is water hemlock. Poison. Hattie, wash your hands right quick. Next day. It's mid-morning and we are still camped. There was so much upset and noise that I am alone in our wagon for a few moments. No one can see me because I'm hidden among the flour sacks. Wish I could disappear for good. When Pa said the word hemlock, panic broke out. Folks who hadn't eaten yet suddenly thought they had. Mothers cried for their children. Suddenly I remembered Cassia. We called her name. Gideon found her curled up inside his family's wagon. When I saw him carrying her limp body in his arms, and when I realized she was dead, I broke down. "Only 2 bites," I sobbed. "It was only 2 bites." 3 graves are being dug by the side of the trail. The 2 younger boys died 30 minutes after becoming sick. Wade hasn't woke up yet. His eyes just stare and his body stiffens and shakes so wildly they've had to tie him down so he won't hurt himself. Pepper is too upset to speak. It crushed me to look at Wade. He is breathing hard and fast through clenched jaws so it sounds like he's hissing. Blood is at the corners of his mouth. I have never seen such a violent sickness. What happened was the boys were so hungry they sampled the vegetables while waiting for supper. We don't know how much hemlock Wade ate, but we're praying it ain't as much as the others. He was the only one whose jaws they were able to pry open long enough for him to swallow. Maybe charcoal in his stomach is absorbing the poison. There is much weeping. Pepper and I showed the men where we found the plants. We were showing them to everyone, walking from wagon to wagon, telling children to be careful, to stay away and not even touch them if they find any while out playing. Pa said at first there's a sweet taste when you take a bite, but then there's a bitter, burning taste. Carrots and parsnips, he showed us by drawing in the dirt, have one root. That's what they are, a root. Hemlock has a few roots joined together like a hand with plump fingers. The color is white, just like parsnips and wild carrots. Even the tops are deadly. Sheep and cattle die from grazing on them. Uncle Tim said that one small root can kill a horse. 1 bite can kill a man. He showed us that when you cut hemlocks, it drips with an oily yellow goo. The other thing is the roots are hollow with rungs, like rungs in a ladder. I'm sick to think I didn't know these things. Later. We have pulled out and left behind that terrible camp along the Platte. Gideon and Mr. Lewis, Wade's father, carved the children's names onto a plank of wood along with the warning and placed it by the graves. The funeral was unbearable. Oh, the tears! We stood with Cassia's parents and sisters. The boys' families also had many aunts, uncles, brothers, and cousins. A lone fiddler played Amazing Grace as men shoveled dirt onto the common grave. Moments later the sun set, spreading gold and purple across the wide flowing river. I ate something fierce. Mrs. Anderson looked at me with eyes full of sorrow, then gently brushed my cheek before turning away. Later, when the stars were out and no one could see me, I ran into the brush and fell down weeping. My heart was broken. Everyone says I'm not to blame, but still I feel dead inside. It's a miracle no one else ate the vegetables. Wade seems to sleep, but his eyes are open and he mumbles words we don't understand. They gave him a sip of rum this morning, which has made his arms and jaw relax. Pepper lifts a spoonful of water to his lips every half hour and rubs her finger along his throat so he'll swallow. He must have bitten his cheek because there is still blood in his mouth. Our mothers pray. They're asking God that if it be his will to please heal Wade. I look over at the Anderson wagon and start crying again. There are half as many diapers pinned to their canvas top. Ma said there's nothing worse than losing a child, and to leave behind the grave never to see it again is an unspeakable pain. Lord, please don't let Wade die. I don't know what day this is. We crossed the South Platte. I've not felt like riding until now. The river is near a mile wide and so shallow lots of folks walk across. This was a very great relief to me. Pepper and I challenged Gideon and some other boys to a race, but we were soon slowed down by our wet skirts. When Gideon saw us struggling to run in the waist-high water, he stepped between us, took our hands, and helped pull us across. It was the first time any of us had laughed for 2 days. Once ashore, we flopped down in the warm sand and stared up at the sky. It was such a lovely blue, I felt for that moment happy again. While Pepper and I wrung out our hems, Gideon turned away, embarrassed to see our bare legs. He's the nicest of all the boys we've met except for Wade. I feel sad Wade's been sleeping these 2 days. His mama keeps a damp cloth over his eyes so he won't go blind. Later. Now that we're in the North Platte River Valley, the air feels dry and thin. My lips are so chapped they bleed when I talk. The only thing to do is dip our fingers into the bucket of axle grease and rub our lips every hour or so, It smells bad, it tastes bad, and the blowing dust sticks. It feels like we must be halfway to Oregon, but Tall Joe says no, we've only gone 500 miles. He also said the worst part of the trail is to come. Does he mean more rivers to cross? Will there be Indians? I'm afraid to ask what he's talking about. The Andersons' wagon had an accident when we climbed up Windlass Hill and were heading down the other side. It was so steep that at the top of the hill we unhitched the teams and led them down separately. Then we chained the wheels to keep them from turning. Also, we cut small trees and tied them behind each wagon for drag, so to slow it down as men lowered them with ropes and pulleys. That's why this place is named Windlass Hill. It took hours and hours. I was nervous watching the men strain so hard, their heels dug into sand, their palms bleeding from the ropes. Ma and some other ladies tore their petticoats into rags to wrap around the men's hands. What happened with the Andersons' wagon is that their front axle hit a stump, which caused the smaller rope to snap. Before anyone could help, the wagon flipped over and over and over, landing in splinters at the bottom. Folks screamed, but it was just the shock of seeing such an accident. No one was hurt. Thank God Mrs. Anderson and her daughters were watching from the top of the hill, for they had climbed out earlier to lighten the load. The only belongings they could rescue were clothes and blankets that were strewn over the rocks when the trunk split open, and a few tools. Aunt June and Uncle Tim right away invited the family to share their own wagon and supplies for the rest of the journey. We also will share. Hazel, Holly, Laurel, and Olive will take turns riding with us. I don't mind giving up my very small spot inside, as it's hot from the sun beating down on the canvas top. I'm tired of the bumping and rattling. Besides, something always tips over. Yesterday it was Ma's bureau. Things are packed in so tight that the bouncing makes the rope spray. My opinion is it ain't safe in there. 2 other wagons got stumped today, so those families will double up with others. There's enough wreckage to completely build a new rig, but no time to do it. We must keep moving. The mules and oxen will go to others who need them. After supper, Gideon came over to where Pepper and I were sitting. He nodded to me, then looked shyly at Pepper. "Won't you please dance with me?" he asked. Pepper leaned over to whisper in my ear. "Do you mind, Hattie?" I turned to whisper in her ear, "He's handsome." She smiled, then squeezed my hand. So there they are, circling the fire with other dancers, shuffling, stepping, turning, his left hand on his hip, his right hand around her waist. Folks watch them and smile. I wish Wade was well enough to ask me to dance. Ash Hollow. The Platte split into 2, so now our trail is along the North Platte River. Our reward for making it down Windlass Hill is the most beautiful campsite yet. It's called Ash Hollow because of so many thick, shady ash trees. There's a spring with fresh, icy water so we can fill up our barrels and such. Everywhere we look, there's firewood and good pasture for the animals. It's so peaceful, Ma said, "Oh, Charles, can't we stay here forever?" A few years ago, some emigrants did exactly that. The family built themselves a cabin and plowed a field. They are friendly to us and have offered to post our letters with the next travelers heading back to Missouri. Many of us quick wrote to our friends. I tore a sheet of paper out from this journal and sent Becky a drawing of hemlock, telling her all. The moon is so full, so I'm writing by its light as I sit near the wagon. There are hundreds of campfires tonight and singing. Ma is walking along the creek with Mrs. Anderson, who has been silent for days. Ma says she's grieving that she finally realized little Cassie is gone and that her grave is far away, in a lonely place along a river she'll never see again. I'm so very sad for her. This makes me watch Benny and Jake more close, for I don't know how Ma and Pa and me could go on if they became lost or died somehow. There are Indians, about 20, camped nearby. The sight of them makes me feel so nervous I feel vomity. Some women came near, holding their hands out, talking in their language. Their deerskin dresses have tiny beads sewed along their sleeves. Their hair is braided over their shoulders. One of them wore a basket on her back with a baby inside, a dark-haired baby with dark, quiet eyes. They accepted Ma's corn cakes without a smile.